My name's Abdul Shayek. I am a theatre director and also a theatre producer. Um, I I was working in Cardiff for National Theatre Wales. Now finished and run my own company called YOCA.
And where were you born?
I was born in Bangladesh. I came to the UK when I was 3, and I grew up in East London, Stratford, and Manor Park, that kind of area.
How did you get involved in theatre?
I think really for me, my initial involvement with theatre was through my school plays. I was quite troublesome at school, got into a lot of trouble, I think really for me, theatre was a place where I could question and prod some of the specific answers that we had to seek out, whereas in theatre we could also question, not just seek out answers, but we could question some of the issues and ethics and realities and morals of life, really. So it was an interesting place for me.
And what made you take that leap to being a professional theatre maker?
I think for me, the moment was really when having left school and gone on to, I went to 4 different colleges. So again, academia wasn't, well, I don't think academia set very firmly in my heart. I think I was quite more about doing things and getting things done. And so I got into a bit of serious trouble, and then after that I also then became a dad, and I realised I needed to kind of sort my life out really and make some decisions. And what was really interesting was that theatre, the theatre world and the people that I knew in theatre were really accepting of my experiences, and rather than frowning upon them, you know, asking me to utilise those experiences and instigate change and provoke thoughts within young people, kind of going down a similar route that I had been down. So yeah, that's really when I thought actually theatre could be a place for me and it could be really interesting.
So when you refer to young people, are you referring to the South Asian community or just young people in general?
No, just young people in general. So working with young people, who, you know, in schools and within communities, in pupil referral units, in prisons, but in essence, just young people. I was quite interested in that world. I also wanted to perform. I love performing, and I think that's another element of why I got involved in theatre. I think the buzz, the adrenaline rush of being on stage and finishing a show and getting the claps, it's there's no comparison really, you know. I play football, and the nearest I guess you could get to it is the euphoria of winning something in a football game, but in a competitive football game, you know, if you win a tournament, I guess there's a kick there, you know, and there's a adrenaline rush there. But I think theatre is completely different in a sense that you've told a story, and this mass of people have really appreciated that story, and you know, and are thanking you for telling that story. So yeah, I think all of those elements kind of came together for me.
And was it acting in a play that changed your mind about something, or was that a cathartic experience?
I was Oberon in Midsummer Night's Dream, and I think the part was really interesting. It was really fun. The kind of setting was really fun in terms of how we updated the Midsummer Night's Dream, that particular version. But also at the same time, it was challenging, and I always enjoy a challenge, and so therefore I really thought this was this was the place for me. This was the thing that I wanted to do, but I didn't quite know how and what and where I wanted to go with it at that particular time. And then at 21, when I made this kind of real decision to knuckle down and try and move forward within the theatre world, again, I wasn't quite sure where or how and what I wanted to do, you know. So yeah, I think for me, Midsummer Night's Dream was the moment, and yeah, that was
So was it the play, or was it the role of Oberon, or was it playing Oberon? What was it?
I think it was a whole host of different things. I think it was the play, it was Oberon, it was the fact that we were making this piece up. So the director of the piece wasn't necessarily saying, this is my set vision and this is how I'm going to make it happen. They gave us the structure to work within, but then we created the detail. And it was a very interesting experience to go through, and I think it still is something that I hold on to as a director now, that I create the structure, the superstructure, and then my actors, my company members, my team, or the team come together, and their ideas, their thoughts, their views are then part of the overall making and an overall shaping of how we tell that particular story. So it's very much, it's, even if it's a script, it's very much, I feel like we've definitely leaned on elements of devising to get to that final product, you know, our final performance. I don't necessarily dictate every single detail. I think I want to learn from the people in the room, because in my head, you know, 5 minds are better than 1 mind, and I always think when you're bringing together creative people, that's something that you certainly shouldn't dismiss, or you shouldn't you shouldn't dismiss other people's ideas, because you know, you can bring your ideas to the table, and if you're open to people building on that idea, then that idea can get amazing, you know, become amazing and get better. But if you come to the table with an idea and it's a closed idea, then you have no room for it to grow. You leave no room for it to grow, and I think that makes it slightly tricky, especially in a rehearsal room, I think. But different people work in different ways.
So it's that journey of the collaborative creative process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's in my mind, whether, again, most of my work is very collaborative. Whether we're in a training program, at the moment we're running a participatory artist training program, and for me it's very much a conversation rather than I am the person with all the knowledge, bestowing this knowledge upon these people who've come along and who want to take part in my training. I don't believe that. I think I'm learning as much from them as they are from me, and that's I make that very clear from the beginning, that there may be things that they don't agree with in terms of what I'm saying and my knowledge and my experience, but that's what I bring to the table, and then they bring another aspect, and together we are training each other in essence, and we're better for it.
So you mentioned earlier on that it wasn't just the South Asian community that you were involved in. So do you think there's anything necessary about the idea of a British South Asian theatre genre or style?
I think it's a double-edged sword. I think it's really tough, because you've got a scenario where without focusing you lose a lot of those stories, but by focusing you also make it a niche, and you sideline it, and you categorize it, and I think, like I say, it's a double-edged sword. So, you know, if you look at the National, we've done our South Asian play for the year, but actually that's not the way it should be thought through. It should be that this is a really interesting story, let's tell it. And whether you come across 3 different stories that year that might, you know, so happen to be part of the South Asian community story of being British, or might have been written by a South Asian person, or whatever, you know, it shouldn't dictate, you know. And I think it's a tough one. It's a tough one to get the balance right. Of course, you need to shine the light in some sense to be able to discover the new talents, you know, to enable people to understand that theatre is for them if they're from the South Asian community, or engage them with the theatre world. Of course, you need to kind of target and be specific, but at the same time, there's got to be a moment where that specificity goes away and it becomes a much broader conversation. I think otherwise you do run the risk of forever being this category, and I think that can be quite tricky then to develop into the mainstream, for example, you know. And I think that, yeah, I mean, I don't have the answers. I think that's certainly an issue I can see at the moment, which needs addressing in some way.
Yeah, because you work at the Welsh National Theatre and you also have your own company. So how do you negotiate this?
Oh, no,
What
no, no. I
exactly?
used to work
Oh,
at NCW, so I finished last April with them. But prior to going to National Theatre Wales, I was freelancing for various different companies across London. And I started my company when I was 21. And really, in Wales, one of the things that's quite interesting at the moment is that there is an issue around the lack of engagement from BAME communities, but also from people. I mean, class is a major thing as well. I think we can't forget about class. I think there's a lot of South Asian families who came over here, or lots of, you know, who came over here and have built up their lives here and become middle class in essence, and they have the spare time to go to the theatre, but it's very few and far between. But there are those people, but then there's a host of, you know, South Asian or BAME communities who don't have that luxury, and quite often theatre is seen as a luxury. And I think one of the things that YOCA as a company is trying to do at the moment is say, well, theatre isn't just a luxury, it's also a way to tell stories, and these stories are important. And I think from our point of view, we're trying to cover a host of different things. We're trying to give people the space to tell their stories, but, you know, we're looking at the stories that people otherwise wouldn't be told. You know, that's what we're looking at. So that covers a whole, like I say, a host of things. It's ethnicity, it's class, it's about gender, it's about sexuality, it's about all of those things that otherwise aren't being told. And how do we do that? And where do we how do we engage with those marginalised communities? And really also looking at the periphery, you know, some of those very socially disengaged groups. We're really interested in working with those groups, and we are keen to make theatre something that they can engage with and feel comfortable within. So yeah, I think in terms of negotiating my role, I think it's really interesting coming out of working for a national organisation with a remit to create work which is national, with, and also much broader than that, also has an international outlook as well, to go into an organisation which similarly, you know, I think the ambition is to go, we can work globally, but the reality and resources is that we have to start locally. And I think that from our point of view, the vision for the company, and we've done lots of restructuring over the last 6 months or so, and I think really the strategy is we start local, but our work inevitably will resonate and reverberate on a global scale. You know, the world is a much smaller place. Let's not forget how easy it is to get in touch with people across the world nowadays. And let's really think about if the UK is as cosmopolitan as it's made out to be. I mean, certainly London is, and certain parts of Cardiff is, but broadly speaking, it's not. But actually, there could be really interesting connections, and let's not forget that, and let's really embrace those opportunities. So, yeah, there's an interesting negotiation happening within me at the moment, which is balancing my life. I think a bigger negotiation for me personally is balancing my life between London and Cardiff, and that tends to take up a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of energy, but I think it's worth it because there's a lot to learn from both places, for me, but also for the two places to learn from one another.
so you're still based partly in Cardiff?
Yeah, so I spend half my time in Cardiff, half my time in London.
But not with the National Theatre?
No.
Is this with your own company or as a freelancer?
No, with my own company. So we have an office there, and we now hopefully will be establishing an office in London, but on the outskirts of London, Elm Park, Romford, the London Borough of Havering, that kind of area, because that's where I live, and there's a real need there as well. There's a niche, there's a opportunity to do some work which is about engaging and telling different stories, because Havering in the last census came out as being quite, I mean, it has the lowest level of ethnic minority groups living there. It's increasing, but certainly it is predominantly white. Parts of it are predominantly white middle class, but there's a huge chunk of it which is white working class. And I think those groups, the new minority groups, the new BME groups moving in, because places like Stratford, like Manor Park, Forest Gate, that kind of very, very much on the outskirts of East London, those the communities or the people that were living there, families, are now being squeezed out because of rents and etc. etc. Money is, it's really expensive, so they're moving further out. And places like Romford, Elm Park, Dagenham, that kind of area is fast growing into more of a reflection of places like Stratford, for example.
Okay, you come from the Bangladeshi community,
Yes.
and how did your family take to the fact that you were going to go into theatre?
They didn't take. They didn't quite get it. They've never quite got it. I mean, other than my sister, everyone else kind of just doesn't get it. I think really, initially it was quite a tough one for them. They didn't get it. But they kind of still don't get it, but they're happy because I'm happy. And I think it's also that thing of, if you're successful at something, or if you've built a career, they kind of go, okay, well, he's kind of getting on with it, so we don't have to worry about him. I think that's the thing with families. Yeah, I think, they were really worried about me when I was 18, 19, 20, because I was getting into so much trouble. But I think now they kind of go, okay, he's traveling the world for his work. Clearly, he's doing something right. So we'll just let him get on with it. And I think one of my main ambitions, or I think a moment when I can invite my family to a piece of work I make, and they watch it and they get it, and they walk out of that, the auditorium and go, okay, I get what he does now. That would be a really lovely moment. But that hasn't happened yet.
But it's got to be relevant to them as well, hasn't it?
Absolutely, and I think that's what I mean. I think it's got to be a piece of work that is relevant to them. I've had friends, again, Bengali, growing up in a multicultural community. And I think Manor Park, where I initially was raised, and then I moved to Stratford, was very much a multicultural mixing pot, because I had friends from all over the world, in essence. But I've got quite a few Bengali friends, and a couple of them have come along to some of my shows, and the response has been mixed. Some of them, one of the shows that I did was a updated version of a Greek mythology, and they kind of didn't get it, which is fair enough, and they were just like, what the hell? And then I did another one which was about football fans, and it was about Millwall supporters and getting into rucks, and they completely got that one. So I think, yeah, you're right, it's about the subject matter and relevance and understanding and knowledge, really. And also, I guess the other flip side of it is, it can be relevant to them and it's great, but the people who came to see the Greek mythology thing, in the future they can reference that. It's building their knowledge and it's expanding their minds, and I think that's also important. And I think I can't shy away from that. I've got to also go, actually, guys, you might not get it, but come and see it, and maybe, at some point, if it's interesting, you might even look into it further. Or the work's going to be so good, you won't care, that you don't get it. You get it because it's so good. But I don't know, it's an interesting kind of juxtaposition in terms of, do you bring people to stuff that they don't get, because they don't get it, they don't quite enjoy it, or do you go, no, actually, you need to, sorry, let me start that again. Do you not bring people to something that they don't get, and then by doing that, you kind of stop them from learning and accumulating knowledge, or do you bring them to something that they do get and really they don't really shift their thinking in any way? They get it, they watch it, and then they go home and go, yeah, I got that. That was relevant for me. I think it's got to be a mixture. It's got to be a mix of both those things. You have to draw people in with things that they see as relevant and they associate themselves with, or they can identify themselves within that world. And then you also have things that they don't identify themselves with. I mean, let's be honest. British Asian people go and see films of all kinds. So why is theatre any different? You know, people see Hollywood movies, Bollywood movies, British made films. You know, and they see a whole range of things, and TV as well. You know, they see a whole range of things, and sometimes they identify with it, and sometimes they don't. But they watch it because I guess, you know, entertainment, but also it's the ease of being able to just flick on a TV. That means that they can watch it, and I think we have to make theatre easier to access.
Do you think that something like a film or TV is contained in a screen, within a screen, whereas in theatre you're faced with live people in a live situation? Do you think that somehow brings a different kinds of response to people? Because like film and TV could be considered a little bit more distant.
No, I completely agree with you. I think there's a whole host of reasons. I think, you know, there is the fact that it is distant. There is the fact that you can respond to it how you want. You can watch it in private, or you can go to the cinema. The etiquette is very simple in a sense, in terms of how you respond to that film. If it's in private, you can respond to it however you want. That's entirely up to you. If it's in your home, you can shout and scream at the TV if you want. You can switch it off. No one's gonna, you know, care really. That's your decision to make. In a cinema, people do respond. People laugh at the same time. People jump at the same time. It's in scary films or whatever. But in essence, there's a very kind of, you go into a dark room, you sit down with your popcorn, you eat it, and you try and stay where you, unless the film requires you to laugh, you don't laugh, and so on and so forth. Whereas I think theatre is the etiquette's slightly different in terms of, I mean, for example, one of the things that I found in a project a while back, we took a group of young people to the Almeida to see a show, and these young people, something happened on stage, and they reacted. It was a natural reaction. Someone got slapped, I think, and everyone went, ooh, and everyone in the audience, all the other people, kind of looked up because we made this noise, and it was like, but it's a natural reaction. It's a live reaction. Something happens in front of you, you react, you know, and you see two people. Because of that liveness, you have to, you know, that was just an instant response from that group. And it was really interesting because the actors afterwards, because we knew quite a few of the cast, so we were talking to them afterwards, and they said, you know, we really enjoyed that. We really enjoyed getting that reaction from the audience. And I think what's happened in theatre, you're not quite sure how to react. If you don't know that world, you're not quite sure. And I think because people go to live events like gigs, you can, again, it's all about reaction. You know, the band want you to react. They want to see people dancing. They want to hear people shouting and, you know, the lyrics and so on and so forth, whatever. But I think you're absolutely right. In terms of that liveness does present a problem in a sense that lots of people aren't educated in the etiquette. But I think also the etiquette has been something that's been kind of readjusted almost, because, you know, if you look at the history of theatre, it was always about people reacting. It was about the audience's reaction. You know, you see pictures and images, and you read about what happened at the Globe. People were throwing tomatoes, and whatever people, people were very, very clear about what they thought about this show, and if it was crap, they told you. Whereas we can't do that now, and it's a bit like, well, if you want that liveness, if that's what we're looking for, maybe there needs to be some room to be able to get the audience to react, because that's what really brings it all alive, doesn't it? Otherwise,
That's really why I was asking you about the National Theatre and your own work, because there's this kind of perception of high art in theatre, in a national theatre, especially if you look at the audience, because they're usually white and older, all behave in a certain way, and that etiquette is perhaps a hindrance for younger people.
yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think younger people feel worried, or I think younger people feel out of place in that setup. I think. So just to be clear, National Theatre Wales is very different to National Theatre in London. I think the National Theatre Wales has an interesting demographic in terms of the audience it reaches. I think that's also because it makes theatre in very unconventional ways and in unconventional places. So it doesn't have a theatre building. So it makes shows in lots of instances site specifically or site responsively. For example, the last show they did, there was a show, I didn't see it, but from what I heard, as an audience, you kind of almost go into the trenches. So they built a World War One trench, or what it would look like, and then the show happens in this trench, and the audience go in, and I think that's a different kind of way of working. And I think what's really interesting at the moment, if you look at the sector, there's a real shift. People are asking those questions, are going, where is the interaction happening? How can we make this interaction more live? How can we make the audience interact and receive this performance in the way that they feel they want to receive it? How can the audience have a more bespoke experience? I think the National in London, and in terms of their audience and their demographic and the way that they present their work, I'm not saying that they don't do site specific. I mean, they just did a co-production with Punch Drunk, and again, that's a very different way of working. But I think both can exist, but I think there's also got to be openness on both sides. I think this is something that has to happen on both sides. People have to understand that some people just want to go and sit and watch a show and react at the end of it and give applause or react when they have to, and they don't want that interaction. And some people do, and there's varying levels of interaction that can happen. And I think really it's about enabling people to understand that there are all those options available, and making access much easier to each of or all of those options. So I think it's really having the variety and making all of those things accessible. I think certainly the National and its audience does need to change. How it does that is an interesting question. I think from my perspective, I think the difficulty with the National is it doesn't do enough national work. I think it's NT Live has been an interesting development, but that can't substitute the National being present in Southampton, or the National being present in Newcastle or whatever. But there's got to be more done to be able to reach audiences, but also I think to reach younger generations. There's this whole scenario where the National is the pinnacle, in essence, and when I started off in my career, if I could direct a show at the National, have I made it? That's the big question, you know. Have you made it as a director if you've directed at the national? That doesn't seem to be, for me, the major question now. I think the question for me is, have I, in terms of the national, and also, sorry, I'm talking on two fronts here. From a personal point of view, I think it's more about how many new people, how many new stories have I told, and whether I tell that in the national or whether I tell that in a community centre, for me it's the same thing. Of course, at the national I have more resources and a platform to reach a wider audience, but you know, I think it's and similarly, I think from a national's point of view, if they're the pinnacle, and if there are stages that people have to go through, then what stage do they come in to take the baton on, you know, or take that development on? Do they start right at the beginning? Personally, I think they do. But whether they think that is a different, you know, kettle of fish, really, and that's a conversation that needs to be had with them. But I certainly think that being the national, you've got to cover the whole spectrum. You've got to do that grassroots intervention work and engagement work, and it can't just happen in London. It's got to go broader than that, and you've got to pick up those people kind of in the mid-career levels, and then people who are really the bright lights and the people who are the stars at the moment of the theatre world. But there's got to be some kind of there's got to be engagement at all stages, and I'm sure they'll say that they do that. So it's one of those things. I'm not quite sure, but yeah, I think it's interesting.
So coming back to your own theatre making,
Yeah.
and you talk about the stories that you would choose. You spoke earlier on that you used to get into a lot of trouble.
Mm.
Now, how has all that affected who you are as a theatre maker?
I think it makes me more empathetic and much more willing to comprehend and understand and really believe in change, you know. If I changed, then a lot of people, you know, out there could change, you know, and because I was in some really difficult places, and I managed to turn it all around. So, and lots of friends and family members kind of look at me and are at times gobsmacked that I've made that. This is such a positive change in my life, and it's quite nice, you know, to get that reaction, because where I was at 19, 18, 19, 20, and where I am now is so different. And I think that gives me a real sense of others can do it as well. And like I say, I empathise and I understand, and I think that is all really, really useful. But also the other thing is, I relate to those people and vice versa, they relate to me. So the conversations that are being had aren't, again, I'm not the expert, I just kind of get you as well, you know, that's where the conversation starts from. I understand, I get what you're saying, and do you understand me? And if you understand me, then let's have this conversation and let's really dig a bit further into it and really continue the conversation. So I think it really affects how I approach projects. And I also think, from my point of view, everything's... I hate hierarchy, and I think that's another thing. I always kind of see others as equal to me, so I'm never... I think that's also something that I've learned through what's happened in my life, and also just given me a real kind of drive. And I think that drives at times and energy rubs off on other people, so that's quite nice.
And where did you find that drive? Because there must have been a lot of pressure against your changing.
There was, and it was hard, I'm not going to lie to you. It was quite difficult, but you find the drive because you realise you're doing something you really enjoy. And you look around and other people aren't doing the things they enjoy. They might be making a lot more money than you are, but they look miserable. And I think it's quite nice to wake up every morning, and although it's a lot of hard work, and um, at times you feel in despair because you haven't got a bit of funding or whatever, it's fine, you're still doing what you enjoy and what you set out to do, and you're still pursuing that, and I think that's what makes me go, actually, no, this all works, this was the right decision, and I think that's really important.
Do you think your parents had that? That's why they changed in many senses, because they came from Bangladesh, didn't they?
Yeah, I think it's tough because with my dad, I didn't really know him that well. Well, he passed away when I was 6, but with my mum, certainly yes, she has changed. My dad, I think the drive and the ambition was there. When I went back to Bangladesh, the last time I was back there, I met people who knew him, and what I learned then was really interesting, because I just went, wow, okay, so this was my father, and I think the positive messages and the way that he interacted with people in his community, or in the people he came across, made me see a lot of synergies in the way that I do things. So I certainly think I've taken elements of his way of thinking and doing things and working, and he was always, I think there was an element, what's really interesting for me is he enabled others, and I'm quite keen to do a similar thing. He did it in a different way. He was the first person from our village to come to the UK, and then he helped to bring others over, and when they came here, he helped to set them up and looked after them. He used to work at the Tate and Lyle sugar factory down the road from here. So yeah, it's all really interesting. In a similar way, I feel like I'm in a position within the theatre world, in the industry, where actually, rather than drawing up the ladder, I need to be sending it down and helping people up that ladder, because it's important that the theatre world is a more diverse place, a more accessible place, in order to kind of really tell the stories that really will fascinate people and audiences.
Yeah, so that's how you reach out to the audiences, don't you? Which particular audiences do you reach out to?
Those who aren't being reached.
How do you describe those?
I think really, from my point of view, it's, at the moment we're doing a project in Cardiff, which is exactly about that. But it's specifically for young people aged between 13 and 19. And with the project, it's called Project Theo, really what we're trying to do is engage young people and say to them, look at the opportunities. You don't necessarily just have to be a performer. There's all these other things you could do in theatre. There's marketing, there's technical work, there's directing, writing, designing, and so on and so forth. Really looking at the whole plethora of different opportunities, agents, casting. What about all of these things? Have you ever thought about it? And so really what we're doing with that project is trying to open the industry up, and in 5 years' time maybe make it a bit more diverse. But in essence, at the moment, what we're trying to do is just engage those people who haven't either been to the theatre before, I've never really thought about the theatre as a place that they can create a career in, or those who have just turned up to a workshop and enjoyed it and thought, you know what, I'd like to know a bit more. How do we reach out to those people? It's always about conversation, and it's long-term conversations. It's not about going in. Again, I use the term parachute in because I think too many organisations do that. They parachute in and they think, right, we need to tick X amount of boxes, and we've got X thousand pounds to spend on this project, and once that's done, we've done our job, let's go. I think really from our point of view, or from my personal point of view, it's about going in, having those conversations, having further conversations, having more, and it's all about conversations. It's all about going, well, we might go into a workshop with a group of young carers and no one turns up to our project field thing. But that's fine, because those young people now know that there is a project that exists. And we'll go in again next year. And maybe next year, one of the guys who was there this year might go, okay, right, last year I didn't want to go, but this year maybe I might go and check it out. And that's a success, and that's fine. I think longer term conversations is so important, and I think that's where, for me, crucially, all of our projects have to be thought through on a long term plan rather than 6 months or a year. And really, restrictions on funding makes that quite difficult. Restriction on resources, limited resources that theatre companies have, makes it really tough to do that. But it's so important.
So you find that your work is really quite closely linked with your outreach work and your long-term goals.
Yeah, absolutely. I think our work, well, YOCA's work is very much linked to the participatory stuff that we do. The way that we've structured the company now is very much on the basis that we have our participatory strand, YOCA projects, and then we've got our production strand, which is YOCA Productions, and then we're looking to develop another strand of the company, which will be YOCA People. And the way that we kind of see it is that YOCA Productions makes the theatre and film productions that we want to make, but in essence, people that we engage with in our participatory, through our participatory strand, and in those projects, maybe at some point we'll cross over and do some work around the production side of things. But longer term, the next strand that we want to develop is YOCA People, which is a creative agency, which then enables us to go, these individuals are really interesting, and they're really interested in carrying on their career within the arts sector. How do we now promote these individuals to the wider industry? And YOCA, as an agency, in essence, what we want to do is it will cover actors, inevitably, you know, that's, I think, the starting point, but really we want to grow from just being acting agents and going, can we also promote people as facilitators? Can we also promote people as directors, writers? Where else can we promote these individuals, and what other parts of the industry can we get them into? And in essence, at some point, that will hopefully create a more diverse industry.
So your sense of theatre is not theatre happening in a particular location like a theatre space, but happens in the community.
Yeah, you take it to them, but then you have to draw them into you as well. It's got to be, again, it's a conversation, it's an exchange. And I think that conversation, so if we go to a group, we do our workshop there once, twice, then we go, actually, why don't you come to us this time? Why don't you come to the theatre space that we're working in? They come to that theatre space we work. So I think it's a two-way thing, you know. You have to go to them, they have to come to you, and I think that's the way you break down those barriers. But it's also knowing about the barriers and being aware of them. I think that's really important. I think it's really, really important. So yeah, I think being from a Bengali Muslim community, some of those barriers are quite apparent to me. So, you know, when I'm working with Muslim communities, I get it, I understand the barriers. And really, how do we then instigate a conversation around breaking those barriers down or addressing those barriers? And that's really interesting. And I think that's a lot of that is about awareness, because people just go, well, you know, theatre, it's singing and dancing, but they forget the really important bit, which is the story. And you go, what about the story? Because actually, the story is what's a key to it. The singing and dancing and everything else kind of is there to help to tell the story, but in essence the story is really at the centre of it. And actually, it's not all singing and dancing, by the way. Do you know, you can't just tell a story, and stories have been told throughout history. That's how we know what we know now, because that's what people have been doing. So what if we didn't do any singing or dancing? We're not breaking any rules when it comes to the Islamic faith. We're telling stories. So where's the next barrier? And people will always present new barriers to you and say, well, I don't want my kid to do it because of X, Y, and Z. But then you can, you know, then you continue those conversations. I think that's what. And again, you don't go in there as the person who knows it all, but you go in there as the person who wants to learn more from the other person and present some ideas of your own, and it's a conversation. Sorry. So anyway, we haven't really spoken about British Asian theatre, have we? We've just been speaking about general theatre.
But it doesn't seem to be important in your case, really, because you're looking at people who don't go to the theatre, and that could be from any community.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's really interesting about, like I said to you earlier, the British Asian kind of, that notion, I think, can be quite limiting. But at the same time, if people have to use that to get to a particular point, then they should. Does that make sense? You know, if they have to stay with, if they have to work within that niche.
Yeah, we're interested in your story, though. Right?
Yeah. No. I'm just okay. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I have played the card before. I'm not gonna lie. You have to play it at points. You know, you do play the card, British Asian card, or whatever. But I think I don't want to be boxed in. I think that's my important thing. And sometimes I feel like a lot of my participatory and education work boxes me into that world, and I don't see myself as just that. I think I'm a creative, but I'm a creative individual who has engagement and participation and bringing other people into this world as a key component within the makeup of the rest of my world and what I want to do and what I want to achieve. But I want to make shows as well. I want to make great shows that people come and see. So it's not just participation and engagement. And I think again, going back to the British Asian thing, similarly, I don't want to make just those shows because then people go, oh yeah, we need a British Asian theatre director, so let's call Abdul. You know, that's not, or you know, there's a very short list of British Asian theatre directors anyway. So I think it's really going, well, how do I engage with that world? Because there is that world, and I can't forget that world. I do come from that world, and I do understand that world. I understand the Bengali community. I get it. I understand the issues that some of those people have and the stories that they want to tell. Absolutely, but at the same time, how do I tell other stories that aren't that I don't know about or I want to tell? And I think that's where I'm heading towards. It's hard.
Describe your theatre space that you mentioned, because you say bringing people into your theatre space. What exactly is your theatre space?
I think really what I mean by that is when I say bringing people into my YOCA space or my theatre space is where we're working. So it might be a rehearsal room in a youth centre somewhere, or it might be a rehearsal room in a theatre building somewhere, or it might be a room somewhere, but it's our rules in terms of that's the ones that govern the rules that govern that space are the rules that we're saying set that space aside from, say, going into a school where they've got their set rules and that's how they operate, and then we have to go in and abide by those rules, and this space is ours and this is how we work in this space. And so we want them to then come and engage with us in this space. And there's not huge differences, but there are differences, and it's about going, you know, this is the difference and this is the similarities, and actually there's not that many differences, so stop being so worried about it.
You say that you can't help being from the Bengali community because, of course, that's where you're from the Bangladeshi community.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how does this being from that community influence your work?
I think it's just the influence is that perspectives, I guess, you know, it goes back to perspectives. I think it's a broader perspective of a scenario. To be honest, I am interested in telling some of those stories. There is one particular story. I want to tell the story of the Bangladeshi diaspora, and what happened when they came over to the UK. Why is it that a large percentage of the Bengali community own or are in the restaurant trade? I'm quite intrigued by that. I'm becoming more politically interested in Bangladesh, but also more politically interested here. You know, I'm quite interested in politics because I think politics is inevitably, you know, it governs our lives and it inevitably shapes our lives and inevitably shapes everything that we do. And yeah, art might say it sits with outside of it, but it sits within it. And I think it's an interesting conversation. And I think really, if you want to create real change, politics has to be the place you have to do it. Art can do it to a certain extent, but where it really happens is in politics. And so I'm quite intrigued by it. I think it's an interesting subject matter, and it's something that now obviously then is having influence in how I and what I want to present. I haven't done a huge amount of work with, say, in Tower Hamlets, which is a massive Bengali community here. I have been invited to do something, but I just feel like I want to find the right project before doing something here. Also, I think for me, it's hard because being from the back, I think it does influence the kind of stories that get. It does influence the kind of stories that kind of get the fire going in my belly. I think that's the major kind of influence. How I tell them, maybe not so much, but it depends what the story is. I think it's all down to, in essence, the story and how I serve that story best. And if it's about drawing on my Bangladeshi British experience, then of course I do. But if it's about drawing on just my British experience, of course I do. Or if it's about drawing on my Muslim experience, then, or Islamic experience, or it all depends, I think, and you take the different components when you need them.
So to round up, which would you, looking back, you just mentioned all your different ways of working and looking at work. Is there anything that actually stands out to you as something that has really been significant for you? Or does that lie in the future?
I think in terms of a particular work, there's been a few that have been quite significant. I think a significant moment in my career, I think, has been probably the last 3 years or so. I think it has really changed and shifted the way I think and work and what I want to get to. I think initially, can I talk about that, or does it have to be a specific project? So I think moving to Cardiff to work for National Theatre Wales was a real game changer in a sense. It made me go, okay, so how does this work on a larger scale? It certainly opened my networks up. I connected with people internationally. It also meant that I had to step up my game in a sense, and I had to really go. I had to find the confidence in me. I come across as quite confident, but at times I'm questioning myself and going, do I have the knowledge and the skills to do this? And I had to really step up to the plate, and I thought I did a good job, I think. And then I think the next major kind of thing for me was being on the CLAW Cultural Leadership Program, and having gone through that process and kind of coming to the end of it, again, it was another really great opportunity to go. I did these 2 years. I came out of the 2 years. I was really worried about what was next. I applied for a couple of jobs. I got an interview for one of them. and I thought, it was really in my heart of hearts. I didn't want the job, I think, but because it was a job, and you were going into something else. I thought, I need a job because I've just come out of this job situation. And I think what's really interesting for me has been that over the last year, I made a decision. I didn't get the job, by the way. Messed up the interview. I think if I did it now, I would have got the job. But maybe then this was at the beginning of the program. But I think what was really interesting, by going through this year-long process of just stepping back, a slight step back to go, what's the bigger picture? I made a very firm decision, and that was to go, actually, YOCA is a significant thing for me. I started it when I was young. It feels like it's unfinished business. It feels like there's a lot of potential there. And so what's next for me is to finish that off. I need to finish that project. I need to get that organisation to a place where it can be handed on to someone else. And I think by making that decision, I'm also then going, well, that means I'm not going to chase X, Y, and Z jobs that come up, because clearly, for me, that's not the place to be at the moment. And I think that's been quite significant. And I think, so those two things combined, the last 3 years have been quite significant, because certainly they've pushed me to a new place, and a new way of thinking, I think. And in terms of projects, like I said, there's been lots of small projects or big projects, but yeah, I think the time, accumulated time over the last 3 years, and the learning of the last 3 years has a much more profound impact on my thinking and my future plans. So that's it.
Well, thank you, Abdul. That was great.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you very much for your time.